it was the Highland clearances that made them leave Scotland with Norman MacLeod to Nova Scotia, and I think they just found it too tough there and kept going down to Australia. But when they got to Australia, heard New Zealand was even better still and kept coming, and that's how they ended up in Waipu.
The clearances started round about 1815 onwards. The people were very poor, but the ones from inland, they were actually cleared to here, on top of the people already here. They were pushed to the coast to make way for the sheep, which the Duke thought would have been more profitable than the people. There were tenant crofters, or tenants in these days, and later they became crofters. But it was a very, very hard life. They were just told who was to be evicted the following day, and if they put up any kind of a fight, they had, you know, thatched cottages in these days, black houses as they were known, they would set fire to them. And if there was an old lady or an old gentleman there that was infirm and invalid, the family would have to drag them outside before the place was set on fire. It was the same all over the north and all the Highland areas. There were so many people trying to make a living of such a small and poor land that they had to go. And they were persuaded, really, to go to Canada, probably Australia later, and New Zealand. Hundreds of families must have gone altogether. And it was just like a death in the family, because a lot of them couldn't read or write, so they couldn't communicate. Once they'd gone, that was it. Whole families. There were boats left from Raffin, a few miles up the road there, and also from Ullapool, where the Reverend Norman MacLeod left from, and took a lot of people with him. And he wanted to be a minister, but he fell out with the church. The church, you see, were involved in that the ministers, some of the ministers were the people that were used by the Duke to tell the people they were next to be evicted. Well, the actual disruption of the churches happened in 1843, and Norman MacLeod just foresaw the whole thing.
For him that shall never return.
Norman MacLeod himself did enjoy respect from most of his people, but there were a lot of them who just wouldn't have hide or hair of him. But it wasn't enough to stop them staying or coming all the way from Scotland in his care, all the way from Nova Scotia out to New Zealand. Because most of the older people spoke only the Gaelic, they needed to be together in a community. And that's why he always seemed to look, and his people seemed to look, for a place that was possibly a bit remote, but where they could keep their own identity. And that's how Waipu grew.
My grandmother was fluent in Gaelic, and I can remember as a small child just sitting there with her and asking her to say different words for me in Gaelic, and she taught us to sing Gaelic songs. When William Maxwell Lang got here, he married one of the people on the Waipu Nova Scotian migration. They had several children, and their eldest son married Rowena Mackay, who was also on the migration. It's the Mackays that came from Plockton. It was actually Donald Mackay, I think three great-great-great-grandfather, who left with Norman MacLeod, and my great-grandfather must have been a child then, and it just seemed important to go back and have a look and see what it was like. It was marvellous to be able to actually see the home that they came from. It's a great sense of belonging, I think. It doesn't seem that long ago to me. The generations didn't seem to be that far apart when you went back and saw still Mackays living in the same house.
We're pretty parochial in the south. We find we grow some of the finest oats in the world. They're processed in Gore. breakfast at our place is a bit like Brown's cows. So it's usually first up makes the porridge, and it's guess who does that most of the time. Just a ritual that we carry on. It's been handed down to us. The Camerons and Livingstons and possibly the McFadgens came out because of the clearances. Otago was being taken up, and they started looking south to Southland, and so they found this wee niche 16 miles north of Invercargill. And Southland is reasonably isolated with the rest of New Zealand. So I suppose we've sort of rebuilt a little Scottish satellite, if you like, in the south. The pioneers were fantastic people, and I'm glad to be a descendant of them. They were shepherds in the Highlands of Scotland, in the Grampian Mountains, which is right in the centre of the Highlands, heart of the Highlands. And I guess it's a strange irony in some ways that the sheep that forced them to leave Scotland, they turned it around and made them support them in New Zealand. Shepherding is a craft. A lot of things handed down from one generation to the other, and you learn things from when you're old enough to walk. You're picking things up. You learn to feed the pet lambs and how to treat animals and things like that.
On the back. And this is the play that my grandfather Cameron brought out. My grandparents were both shipmates on the Henrietta. The parents of both of them were on the Henrietta, and my great-grandmother's father came out with them too. He was 90 years of age.
I'm fourth generation and virtually go back to pure Scottish lines.
And that is the church, Bellacoolish. My grandmother and her brothers and sisters and my great-grandmother were married in. In 1972, my husband and I visited Bellacoolish. Oh, it was wonderful. Go back to the old church. It's an old building. They've just about had it now, I've been told.
Where Mum was brought up wasn't far from Hokanui, and that opens up a great big subject. The story goes that young Murdoch, or Murder they called him, he was the professional whiskey maker.
His mother came out from Scotland, and I think some that they brought their recipe with them. And there's one man in particular who made it, and he was very particular who he sold it to, too. He didn't just give it to anybody.
Murdoch McRae would only sell to professionals, doctors, lawyers, police, people he said who could keep their mouths shut. Some of the Hokanui was sold in Bellamy's in Wellington.
Oh yes, here's the old Hokanui bottle. It sort of brings back good memories of my younger days when I was working up towards McRae's flat. We used to see quite a bit of it up there. A crate or two appeared every now and then, and it was very popular stuff. I'm not too sure just how much to say about it, but everything went off very well. And but unfortunately, those days are past, and I don't think we'll ever see very much of it again.